and degraded lands, degraded grasslands, conversionary areas in high conservation ecosystems. All of these are areas that are wide open for the asset class that allows us to drive forward and degraded lands, degraded grasslands, community, conversionary areas in high conservation ecosystems. And that's where the role all of these are areas that are wide open for the asset class come into that allows us to drive forward and degraded lands, degraded grasslands, community, conversionary areas in high conservation ecosystems. And that's where the role all of these are areas that are wide open for the asset class come into that allows us to drive forward and degraded lands, that is degraded grasslands, community, conversionary areas in those high conservation ecosystems. And that's where all of these are areas that are wide open. So what that allows us to drive forward and degraded lands, degraded grasslands, community, conversionary areas in high conservation ecosystems. And that frankly also this evening we have the election of the task force for future-related financial disclosure, requiring all companies and finance sector to be able to disclose, as we do on climate, the risks and opportunities. Finance sector. Real action. That helps drive the market. Well, and we know that we can use nature-based solutions. Land degradation. It's really important. Get on to me and do quick word cloud survey with 2 questions. And then our speakers are going to be able to who's not here to are you you're investing your scale come in. So how do we scale the impact by increasing Love here as well. Great. Barriers. I hear all the time. Great, let's go. Why are we not getting? And there's a valid reason for this. There's a lot of real risk. Really, I think this point about standardization is key. We need these types of frameworks, and we'll be talking a little bit about that later on in our session. Driving risk is initial mutation in the lack of have been able to change what it is to do. Rick is here with us from the U.S. Department. The key driver behind the Florida Investor Club is finding.
superpollutants in the third around the world. So electric vehicles, turns out, are a forest solution going forward. As a way to cut emissions, but also data in 2022, global deforestation rates actually and matters as creative as we can. storing. And we just mentioned that we are very hopeful with the way that the project is going have that for that particular project, including itself, I'm very optimistic. Plenty to do. Develop as much of those kinds of
Thanks, Rick. It really you opened up by talking about this is a multi-sector issue. So although you're talking any questions for Rick and the Department's role of why this type of investment is so critical? They want to catch
it's probably one of the biggest for the Amazon recovery. You know, this has been a issue of multiple years in Brazil, and understand it's from
and in mobilizing investment wherever, including projects like this BTG Pactual Development Finance Corporation example. We'd like to do as much as we can broadly as we can. When it comes to
investment, wherever, including projects like this BTG Pactual Corporation example, we'd like to do as much as we can.
one other thing I'll mention. In development right now, we're eager on the back end of that to find a way forward to globalize investment as quickly as possible.
Right now. To provide investment as quickly as possible.
So across the board, that's the spirit that we're trying to bring to this, and we're really excited about but what we've seen.
So across the board, that's the spirit that we're trying to bring to this, and we're really excited about.
Great to show what the as countries by country, so what, and then we'll move on.
Connection to President Lula, including on genuine warmth between the leaders there.
The connection to President Lula,
Take that
Great. That type of examples of where some of the challenges are, what the work needs to be done, and what it really looks like for government to government partnership and collaboration in these things. If we can have the director of the climate change director for the forest.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody here. It's really a pleasure to be presenting to the Forest Investor Club, and I'm sure there are other stakeholders in the room who would also find very still should work. And I keep sharing this data. How do we get there? And we want to get the statistics and finances. So the first has come up with some action. So I'm going to use the of the different activities for the how to work with and the right the part south and north what can we actually do? We are reducing our mission for forest. We are in a time where forests are impacted. But the second language of people that we what so we're really so trying to use counterparties to overcome barriers for nature. We shouldn't be that we keep hearing that nature has the ability to deliver about 30% of the climate solutions that we Ghana structure. Yeah, one of the questions. How we are going to go within the foreign carbon businesses with fleet carbon fund. Key results the agreement on the red flag mechanism, which we have been engaging for so long. Going back, yeah. Have of debt for nature's loss. That's a very good one. I think that you want any government to commit to a debt for nature. Number of partners have expressed interest in that by now we are going to have more what is
I think you brought up a couple of key pieces with the SLP. One is that the translation for the finances into a level implementation plan, which is where we actually need to start moving. Investment is going to be a feature initiative of the work that the president is highlighting and continuing to accelerate. We saw from companies. We want to again leverage the model. So, as I said, the NPO has a secretariat.
do feel free to reach out to us. I'm available after this session as well. I can give you but the US and
well, we're here. Any other quick questions for us as we move on to Jamie? More.
I was just wondering how projects plan on ensuring transparency regarding
Auntie has
Right.
half of the red flag.
Just wondering how this is like,
Dean
very
has
transparency.
set up paved that largely and environmental issues. We already have like infrastructure both at the national level and also at the national level. That's what it so
highlighting a really important accountability for how this is moving. But US
U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, and I wanted to start off by thanking my co-host, and I wanted to mention here, and in particular to commend you forums. Who the DFC is, the United States Development Bank. We were formally launched in 2020, building a lot of invested in this area for decades. We're work done under the oversight of investment. Right at the And so, addition that would somehow bring the private sector. Private sector participation. We can do that in this number. I would summarize those essentially three different financing, both debt. Also provide insurance. Also have the technical capacity building for both demand side and supply side. Our mandate is to work with private sector companies to prioritize activity in low income and lower middle income countries that are classified by the World Bank. We also clearly there has to be a private sector. Generally, government. So risk insurance, but certainly describe our most while we're providing finance there is an expectation that also world and priorities with low and low and middle income countries. We do work as is typical with most triple So, slide, I just wanted to share a little bit. Rick already spoke earlier today about the priority of the administration in terms of addressing climate change. The ventures, and we worked with the nature conservancy, various political wisdom that and of course, as I mentioned a couple of times this morning, we're always in progress of involved in understanding how it impacts the local community. Things that we're looking at.
Great, yeah, this is around dealing with here the example partnership has been with Forest Club members there, moving the money out. What it's going to take.
I think we're quite given talk a little bit about the process unfolded. A year to 2 years, depending on the complexity of the project. Price transaction. Yet very large. I think up to $1
I've based investments together and they're a little tough to get up to that level of scale. So this is part of what we've got, the challenge we have to unlock. And
Great question. And I think action I think the sensitivity of the working with land actually and local community require
Thank you so much. Really. So again, an invitation, but it's along the sides and the back. Chairs are. But I think this has been a great setup with Roslyn and Rick and Jamie to talk about.
Right, this, in the context where I think we're just moving in the right direction, but a lot less. We need more. We need new approaches. Asset owners and asset managers, finance institutions, companies, and others. No idea for institutions together organizations. Second is pipeline, and as I mentioned, making these connections with groups like Forest Climate Leaders Partnership, other project developers, to find new opportunities to connect with the capital. A little bit more about the investment. They're legitimate investment. I do want to highlight, because it is called Forest Investor Club, that isn't just limited to forests. We have a whole protection, conservation, forests, but also protecting grassland. Really produced that's highlighted. We talked about some of the barriers. I mean, many of them are perennial barriers that we've been trying to crack for a long time. Some of them sort of give the flavor of the latest. Have some sharing progress, and then we have some individual we have ways we launched that continuing, which I've taken and actually that's really
those themes are what we're going to click into with our next conversation. So with that, I'd like to invite our next panel up, Morova, Apple, BTG Pactual Timberland Investment, and Lombard Odier. Come on up, guys. Thanks. Ruben, I'm going to turn, sorry. I'm going to come to you first, because Lombard Odier has done actually quite some impressive work putting together a climate nature fund. And you've started to learn from that process what you're seeing as the results. And we'd love to hear from you through this partnership and with those applied learnings, what you need to take away and how you're going to use that to continue to scale those investments.
Thank you, Diane. And thank you to the Forest Investor Club and WBCSD and the U.S. State Department for organizing this. So maybe just to step back a little and talk about what we're doing. Lombard Odier is a 225-year-old Swiss banking and investment group, and we have an asset management arm with about 70 billion under management. And what attracted me and what I think is really interesting is that we've taken a very strong investment thesis that from a perspective of just delivering healthy returns to investors, some of the most exciting opportunities are going to be around sustainability. So to try to build out a product suite, we have invested a lot in partnerships, particularly to build a strong analytic basis to tackle these problems and think about these issues from a system perspective. And so this has led to some partnerships with academic institutions like Oxford, but then most recently to taking the partnership that we'd had for various years with a group called Systemic, which is a leading consulting and system change analytic group, to launch a new platform called Holistic. So Holistic now has, it was announced in June. It's going to be within Lombard Odier. It's got about 100 people now, about 2/3 from Lombardodier, 1/3 from systemic. And the idea is really to have this focused platform to invest in nature and other sustainability themes along 4 main areas. One is energy transition, land and oceans, circular economy, and carbon and environmental markets. So it's early days, but it's a big bet. And we have started with what's the relatively low hanging fruit, which is more on the public equity side and public market side. So we have this food systems fund that was featured in the case study guide, which is investing in public, publicly listed securities of companies involved across the supply chain of sustainable food production. And now the next challenge is to move into more of a private equity and real asset strategy around sustainable commodities. And we're doing a similar thing around carbon. We started with a more liquid carbon trading fund and now moving towards more project finance. So I think in terms of lessons, it takes time to build up the expertise, and it's a lot of investment, but we're hoping this will pay off. And also that it's important to start somewhere. So we started with what's relatively faster to get going, to prove the concept, prove that we can deliver returns, engage and have dialogues with also the investors, see what they want, and then slowly be building from there.
Ruben, thanks. And I love actually the fact that circularity is included in that as well, because it helps us to accelerate that part of this incredibly important agenda that we don't talk about often enough. But let me ask you just one more question, if I can, before we move on. And that is, you're talking about the conversations that you're having. I'm sure they've changed since you've started this. What have you seen as the most remarkable surprise coming out of the different types of discussions you've had, learning from where you're driving these investments?
Well, I think it's been interesting to see how, at the beginning, I mean, at least from my perspective, coming from this, previous background more in the nonprofit side, from more of the academic side, we thought a lot of the investors would be really motivated more from the impact side, and frankly, that is there. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of investors really are thinking of these issues just in terms of bottom line returns and seeing opportunities there. So that's been interesting, that there's a lot of interest in how investing in these themes can, especially now with sort of what's happening in the broader markets. People are really hungry for diversification, for different asset classes, for new kinds of investing. So it's been really interesting to see that interest just from a portfolio perspective.
Great, Ruben, thank you. This starting to move from just return to the multiple benefits is a key. I'm so glad you brought that up through that. Thank you. Mark, let me come to you next. So BTG has been moving towards $1 billion in investment in reforestation, particularly in Latin America. How are you seeing that start to take effect as you move that forward? What are you learning, and what's some of the advantages of going with that very regional focus?
Yeah, thank you, Diane. Well, maybe I'll start by adding my thanks to the Department of State for launching the Forest Investor Club, and to WBCSD and Ryan and Diane and team for your leadership over the past year, and congratulations on the report and on all of these events. And I would say, so just to give a bit of background on BTG, we are the largest investment bank domiciled in Latin America. So we're headquartered in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I work for the Timberland Investment Group. We manage about 1.3 million hectares of forests in the Americas, in North and South America, all sustainably managed. But over the last 2 years, together with a number of collaborators and partners in the room, we've developed a strategy focused on reforestation. And one of the reasons for that comes out of some of the data that you presented earlier on, Diane. The analysis of natural climate solutions concludes that a third or up to 37% of the mitigation we need to achieve the Paris Agreement can be delivered by nature by 2030. And of course, that's true. The lesson that we draw from that is not just that nature can contribute, but actually it has to contribute if we have any chance of achieving that climate stable future. But embedded in that analysis is a really hard truth, which is that for us to deliver that benefit, we have to work at really large scales. So 100 acres of reforestation or 1,000 acres of reforestation can have a massive impact locally. It can be critical for habitat, for communities, for a watershed. But until we're talking about millions, and in fact, that analysis assumes that by 2030, we plant 200 million hectares, or we restore 200 million hectares or 500 million acres of new forests in the next 7 years. That's about 80% of everything that's been planted since essentially the beginning of time. So the scale is massive, what we need to achieve. The reason that we're focused on reforestation is really twofold. First, the impact is so dramatic. Trees grow quickly, they sequester a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere. And second, another point, Diane, that you made earlier on and that you just touched on, which is circularity. The FAO projects that we'll need 37% more primary forest products by 2050 without considering growth of the bioeconomy. And all of those products need to come from somewhere. And so newly planted, sustainably managed forests need to be, we think, a part of that solution for climate and for the bioeconomy, and of course for nature. So our focus in our strategy is a focus that is a 50-50 focus. So we acquire properties that were forest in the past, that were deforested, and we then restore natural forests. We protect whatever forest is there. We restore natural forests so that we have 50% of our portfolio in natural forest, and the other 50% then we establish sustainably managed commercial tree farms. Latin America is an obvious place to focus because first of all, that is where so much of the world's cattle pasture is located, and that's really where trees can economically compete. It's also where trees grow incredibly quickly. In fact, the fastest growth rates of not just commercial tree farms, but of restored natural forests, of natural regeneration, are found in Latin America. So if you want to work at scale and quickly, that is a place to be. It's also home to perhaps the world's most sophisticated forest industry when we're talking about technology and efficiency, and of course, a robust civil society. And so I would say one of the lessons that we found is that partnership, collaboration is critical. What we're seeking to deliver is the same thing that we seek to deliver in all of our investment funds, an opportunity which is appealing to investors who are seeking, as Ruben said, a financial return. But we have very ambitious goals for community impact, for biodiversity impact, and for climate. And that's something that we really realize that we can't do alone. And so we've been working very closely with Conservation International to help as impact advisor to the strategy, to help us ensure that we can deliver that impact, that we can monitor that impact, to the conversation earlier, and we can report on that in a really clear and incredible way. And we think that in the end, if we're successful in delivering this 37% of mitigation that nature can provide, what that means is trillions of dollars flowing very rapidly into rural landscapes. And we need to do that well. We need to do that well, not just in terms of deploying capital, deploying financial return, delivering the climate benefit, but we need to deliver equity, and we need to deliver a nature restoration. Because if we can't deliver all of those, we ultimately will fail in our ambition, and we won't have the social license that we'll require to deliver all of that capital in that period of time.
Yes. Because I think the short answer, and I love that you brought out that it has to be all of that. You know, this is not a single strategy approach to investment, single outcome, like you were saying, Ruben's approach to investment. Maybe just very quickly, Mark, I mean, what do you see? You've been a partner, obviously, with Forest Investor Club. What do you see as the role in helping with that from an FIC standpoint?
Well, lots of roles. I mean, some of it is just these conversations, right? Conversations, curated conversations like this, and then the informal conversations that develop and occur among members, right? And then the collaborations that come from that. There's also, I think, a lot of space for pre-competitive collaboration. We're all grappling with issues around efficient monitoring of nature-based solutions. We're all grappling with questions around, and when I say monitoring, I don't mean just knowing where the trees are and how fast they're growing, but actually establishing social impact baselines and monitoring against those, actually establishing metrics for biodiversity that are replicable and comparable. So we're all grappling with some of those same kinds of questions, and this kind of information sharing and idea swapping, I think, is critically important. So helpful. Thank you. And I just want to note, I see Rosalind shaking her head yes also in the corner to this. So this is not just the investors, this is the country level needs as well. And this is where bringing it together really makes such a big difference. Thanks, Mark. Chris, I'm coming to you next. Okay, I just want to know,
You all, you've got a panel of investors up here. How many of you expected to see Apple on a panel of investors? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah, a couple. I think it's a really important message about the role of companies. And I have to just give one other shout out, because who saw Apple's corporate responsibility sustainability report launch this week? Anyone? Who featured in that very innovative way of delivering their annual report? Right. How creative is it to invite Mother Nature into the boardroom to give the update and then use that as your report launch? Very cool. So lots of exciting reasons to have Apple up here with us, but talk to us a little bit about, why is Apple making these investments? What's it delivering for the organization? And what do partnerships like this actually enable?
Okay, first, thanks, Diane, Ryan, and the whole FIC team. I mean, it's really an honor to be here. And for Apple, we've been carbon neutral for our corporate operations since 2020, and by 2030, we have a goal to be carbon neutral for all of our products as well. That means their manufacturing, their transportation, and the lifetime use of those products. Now, that's an ambitious goal, and it's centered around a target to reduce our comprehensive carbon footprint, that's scopes 1, 2, and 3, by 75% from our 2015 baseline. Now, that we think is aligned with a 1.5 degree trajectory. Now, there are some places here where we just don't yet have line of sight to how we're going to avoid emissions in our inventory. And that's that remaining 25% of emissions that are left. And that's where we see carbon removals coming in to play a really important role. Once you've taken care of reducing as much as you possibly can, removals need to make up the difference. And we don't see a 1.5 degree pathway that doesn't involve removals. They're just those trajectories, we don't see them from the IPCC, unfortunately. So we're beginning by investing in nature. And the reason we're starting with nature is it's scalable. And there are a whole bunch of other impacts that can come from good investments in nature-based solutions. So we will, and we are already investing in forests, wetlands, and grasslands in order to do this work. So in 2021, we launched a partnership with Conservation International and Goldman Sachs, which was our first Restore Fund, so an up to $200 million commitment in that fund. And then just earlier this year, we followed that with another commitment of an additional up to $200 million of investment capital with Climate Asset Management, which is a joint initiative between HSBC and Pollination. These funds in aggregate are targeting about 2 million tons of removals per year when they peak. The Restore Fund, I think, is a really innovative approach. We're not only trying to go after here carbon removal and climate impact, but we're also aiming to demonstrate simultaneously that we can achieve financial return in that work. Now, to do that, though, each of these projects has to have clear and discernible climate impact, obviously, but at the same time, we're looking at what are the community benefits where we're investing and where these projects are, and what are the biodiversity and ecological impacts where we're looking. We're looking at high conservation value areas. And of course, we're looking at third-party standards and validation to make sure that the work that we're doing is of the highest integrity, looking at standards like FSC, CCB, Gold Standard, and Vera. The first 3 investments that we've made spread across Brazil and Paraguay are really exciting. We are aiming to restore about 150,000 acres of sustainably managed working forests. And on top of that, an additional 100,000 acres of native forest, wetlands, and grassland area being protected. And these investments are estimated to get to about 1 million tons of carbon removal per year around 2025. So I think some really exciting progress and how it fits into what we're trying to achieve.
That's great. Chris, as I listen to you, I'm like, this is why companies need to be making these types of investments as well. And because it's so linked to the climate strategy, but focused so clearly on nature, the impact that you're able to have is really quite compelling. What do you think, just quickly, the 2 biggest learnings that you've taken away from this that other companies, non-finance investor groups, but companies who are doing this need to be considering?
I mean, one of the most important things that we're thinking about is scale and scalability. It's not enough to be able to just go out and get a single solution and make a single investment. We have to think about, how does it scale? And then the other piece is, transparency. You've got to look very clearly at where you're investing and make sure that what you're doing has really high integrity and really does have and is going to have the impact and the desired outcomes that you're kind of going in trying to achieve.
Yeah, again, this point on integrity and focus on outcomes, I think, is so key. And of course, the things that Apple's looking for with these investments are frankly no different. And that's why these partnerships coming together really can make such a big difference. Thank you. So Sam, let me come to you next. So Morovas, you guys have been in this space for a long time. You've been making investments along these lines in nature-based solutions for a long while. What's been driving the strategy and what have been the key takeaways? What do you see as the accelerators now as more people start to crowd in?
Well, thank you, Diane, and thank you for the Forest Investor Club for this wonderful event. I think it's really important to bring us all together to think about ways that we can collaborate, even in a pre-competition nature. It's really interesting to see kind of so many different partners together, very, very similar focus. From Morovas' perspective, Morova has always been focused on how to mobilize capital that can confront and address the climate crisis. Looking across Morova's activities, we have a large activity around publicly listed companies, always looking through a lens of kind of working investments in companies that are supporting the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as supporting keeping the globe on a target for 1.5 degrees Celsius. In our private asset side as well, we have quite a big activity focusing on energy transition, looking around renewable energy and wind and other types of activities, thinking increasingly around electronic mobility and kind of as a way of addressing it. And then within the natural capital space in our nature-based solutions, really helping think through how can we finance this transition to sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture. Within that, we have a number of different focus areas. We focus on, within the Sustainable Ocean Fund, we focus on sustainable agriculture, aquaculture, as well as circular economy, reducing pollution and reducing plastics in the oceans. We also think then through the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, how can we help support the transition to sustainable agriculture on terrestrial land systems? That is very much focusing on kind of supply of timber, as well as other commodities, whether it's cocoa or coffee or other types of ideas of how can we do this in a way that is sustainable, that respects biodiversity, and that supports local communities. And what does that look like? And then finally, we've kind of sat down and said, well, that is helpful and that is essential in terms of making sure there is a transition across the globe, but it's probably not enough. That even alongside that we need to think about ways that we can invest to protect and restore nature. And around that, we're looking at a range of different environmental assets, predominantly carbon credits that are coming out of the voluntary carbon market, which we see as a tool that can be used to allow these investments to become economically viable. We see, we are somewhat agnostic as to kind of what is the tool that we want to see. We want to see that it is, but what we're looking for is ways to find additional revenue streams that can help make projects grow and succeed. Across that, one of the kind of connecting themes for all of Morova's activities is very, very rigorous ESG practices and kind of very kind of structured analysis of what that looks like. That is true on the listed side of our investments. It's even more so true on our private asset side, where we go through very, very detailed, rigorous work on it. That is essential in the nature-based space. That is essential in the nature-based space because that level of integrity and that level of quality is how you deal with permanence and how you make sure that your work is going to last over time. One of the kind of difficult ironies of investing in climate is that it's an area that is most exposed to climate change, and thinking through what are those types of things. And by having kind of solid ESG kind of analysis is one of the ways that we de-risk that to make sure that we're making investments that are going to be last for a long time. Then within the carbon markets, that's even more so the case, where investing in carbon markets, whether it's around avoided emissions through REDD+ type programs or reduced emissions or sequestered emissions that is looking through ARR or other types of solutions, thinking through how you do that in a way that has high quality credits, high integrity is essential, because if you're not going to do that, if communities aren't benefiting from it, you won't be able to keep the forests alive. If you're not thinking about what is the permanence, you'll end up generating credits that ultimately have no value. And how do you think about that as kind of the coordinating way of how Mirova approaches all our work?
Yeah, that really puts the community role front and center as a partner, a really long-term partner, and what makes these types of investments successful. So again, a lot of key points in what you shared about relative to how you de-risk as you build these out. It's key. I want to ask you one additional question, Sam. You know, a lot of our discussion here today and a lot of the examples that we've spoken about have been focused in Latin America. But we had Rosalind up here earlier talking about the FCLP and the country package for Ghana. What does it take to accelerate deployment of capital into the continent of Africa as an example of how we have to scale this across markets?
I think it's a great question. I think there's two different sides of it. So there's a short-term, easy answer, particularly if you have investors like DFC in the room, which is more blended finance. It's thinking through how you can address both some of the kind of transaction costs associated with identifying and then structuring investments, particularly small-scale investments. Mirova funds, we have the ability to invest, up to less than 5 million. So complementing the work of DFC and kind of being able to kind of address that. And I think that's essential for many of these investments in Africa. I think secondly is thinking through kind of how do you build through kind of standard approach, making sure that you have kind of investment vehicles that can scale, because you're able to use the same type of structure over and over and over again across jurisdictions. I think that is true in the short term. It's probably not sufficient in the long term. In the long term, what you really want to be thinking through is success. That the way that you'll be able to mobilize significantly more capital into Africa and frankly into nature-based solutions around the world is by saying that this is an asset class and this is an approach to investing that works, that is able to have very, very high impact and is able to have returns that are commensurate with the risks. That can certainly be done kind of by having businesses and entrepreneurs being successful. It can also be very much done by thinking through what are the ways that we can drive demand for products that are developed through sustainable practices. And how do we think about that? And that's kind of key for Africa. It's key for the rest of the world.
Looking to see if we get a head nod from Rosalind. I think these are key points, right? So how we look at the quality of the investment, what it takes to de-risk that investment, who you need to partner with, how you build those trusted partners. And I think that's a really important role for Forest Investor Club, but it's bigger than just that. So how do we continue to accelerate those who are investing in this space, make sure it's done with the credibility, the integrity, the quality and the long-term outcomes that we're talking about, and continue to go forward from there. So I'd love for everyone to please give a huge thank you to our panelists of investors. There really is a rich source of information in the annual report. If you've not had a chance to see it, it has been referenced a lot here today. Please use the QR code to download it. I love that even though we're here talking about nature-based solutions, we've moved away from publishing paper that we all have to carry around with us. So please do go after that digital copy and know that there's also information that came from the Forest Finance